Welcome back to the Raw podcast. This is a wellbeing podcast that will inspire you to create a life that you absolutely love. Not only create, but live a life that you absolutely love. Here at Raw, we care deeply about people's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. Too many of us walk the tightrope between pressure to perform and fighting fatigue from not prioritizing our well-being. We literally work through our burnouts and sacrifice our work-life balance just to get ahead in our careers. But there is another way, and it starts with the resilient you. Hi, everybody. I am your host, Marilise de Villiers-Basson, and this is episode number 8 for 2024. And today I'm really delighted to welcome Carley Nicholson. Hi, Carley.
Yeah, hi, Marilise.
So good to have you. I know it's super early where you are. Carley is dialing in from New Zealand. So we literally are contending with time zone differences. And I think it's a whole 13 hours between us. So that's interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about Carley, everybody. So Carley is an experienced and engaging workplace trainer and facilitator, and has expertise in communication, leadership, resilience, and well-being. From an award-winning background in relationship marketing and small business management, she uses her extensive leadership and management experience to deliver training full of useful tools for individual, team, and business growth. She is on a personal mission to transform organizations into hubs of peace, positivity, and productivity, and help people live longer, happier, and healthier lives. I absolutely love that, Carley. And I think that's what made my first conversation with you so magical, because it was like we absolutely speak the same language, and I'm so super delighted to have you here with me. I can say lots more about all your accolades, but I think, the thing that really stayed with me from our conversation was that real passion that you have for well-being and, holistic well-being, and really about peace under pressure. So Carley's organization is called Peace Under Pressure, and we are going to dive deep into that today. So let me start with that, in fact. And really that passion that you have to bring more peace, positivity, and productivity into the workplace. So what was your inspiration?
Well, I'll have to probably give you the short version, Marilise, otherwise we'd be here all day. But some of the key points of inspiration for me, really, I was at one point in a job, in a role where I was absolutely miserable. I was not coming home a very pretty version of myself, as I say, and really I wasn't using my skills and strengths. I wasn't living in line with my values. I didn't even know what my purpose was, which was really confronting at the time. And really, through a series of serendipitous conversations, which I look back now and think how fortuitous, I became deeply curious about people, about how we show up as the best versions of ourselves, so we can do our best work that's meaningful and fulfilling. But that's also aligned with business success. So it's an interesting mix with, I guess, with my business hat on, thinking about how businesses thrive, but also it's through helping people be the best version of themselves. So it's been an amazing journey over the last few years with, I guess, some amazing people that have, I guess, led the way for me.
That's wonderful. And I think, it's so profound when we have that moment, especially in the corporate career. I can relate. I've tried so hard to fit into this kind of corporate box for 16 years, and only sort of realizing after severe burnouts and sort of being on my knees, essentially, from working so hard, trying to fit into that box. And as you say, feeling kind of empty and feeling meaningless and feeling without purpose. And so I think that's really why it's so amazing that, we come from our lived experiences. We kind of teach our curriculums that we've lived and breathed and experienced and continue to live and breathe and
Mm.
experience. So it's amazing. It's amazing to hear, it's like you hear stories and it's like, oh my gosh, your story could be my story. And, there's so many shared experiences in this space. And I know you're also a qualified resilience coach with the Resilience Institute. So
Mhm.
what does that sort of look like on a day-to-day basis? I mean, what sort of, work do you get up to in that space?
So the resilience coaching I actually started doing for my own personal benefit because I love the framework around the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health and well-being aspects. But I found that I think it's maybe the one-on-one coaching look I love. But for me, the scalability of being able to work with teams and bringing people together, I just discovered that's where the magic happens, what happens for me anyway, and having groups of people working together. So I've actually made the shift into working with groups, working with teams, and that's what lights me up. That's what fills my soul. So I find I'm probably doing less direct work around resilience now. It's actually more around communication because what I found is that when we're under pressure, when we're under stress, particularly unhealthy stress, because there is such a thing as healthy stress, our communication changes. And really, this was part of my personal journey of thinking, well, the well-being piece is all very good and well and interesting, but how does that influence our behaviours, our actions and behaviours? And that's where I've naturally gravitated now towards focusing more on communication, but that requires a foundation of well-being and taking responsibility for ourselves. I think is
Yes,
huge.
absolutely.
Helping people understand what they can do for themselves to take responsibility and practice self-leadership.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm very passionate about inside out living. It starts
Mm.
with you and it starts with you believing in you and that you are enough. And so, just everybody, just as a side note, Carly lives on the north shore of Auckland, New Zealand, and she loves being at the beach, ballroom dancing, weight training, and spending time with her family and friends. And I think for me, that just speaks volumes of, how important that balance is and that
Mm.
well-being and that longevity is in terms of how we live our lives happier, healthier,
Mm.
and essentially longer lives, so beautiful. Okay, so let's talk more about communication because I know you're
Mm.
passionate about it. I'm passionate about it. First of all, I just want to pause on moments that matter. And so I sort of define moments that matter as really as pivotal moments where we have key conversations or decisions, where our choices and actions really significantly impact our personal journeys and our future. And you've just given a perfect example of how you made a very definitive decision, to
Mm.
step away and start your own thing because you lacked that purpose and that passion in your day to day. So really that's pivotal moments that sort of stand out, that are shaping and guiding us towards our true authentic purpose. And so, was there a particular moment in your life where, a key conversation or a significant decision significantly impacted your personal journey?
Oh, it's
You said
probably
many. You
lots.
said you
Many,
said many.
one of the funny enough, one of the key memories that comes to mind was that when I turned up to work one day and I said to my business partner, I don't want to be here anymore. I can't do this anymore. And it was just profound for me how the words actually came out. I didn't expect to say that out loud. And I think from there, it took me 2 years to move on from that role because I had to figure out what do I do from here. And this is where actually a lot of my deep work started in terms of what's my why. I even started writing my eulogy. What do I want people to say about me when I'm gone? Like, that's some pretty deep work. Exploring what are my values, what are my strengths. And then that's all very good and well, but then it's going, so what can I do with this? And it's about taking action so that we don't get stuck, because we often get stuck in places in life. So I'm a big fan of a concept called behavioral activation. So rather than waiting for the motivation to do something, the idea is if we take some action, even the smallest action, that gives us progress or results, that breeds, I guess we get some fulfillment, that breeds the motivation for us to continue. And so I started with a series of small actions, and so those were the decisions I was making about stepping forward in different directions. And it was amazing once I started taking small but important steps. Doors started opening for me. And so a really big part of this was really around my identity. We're getting into some deep things now, but
Yes.
figuring out what kind of person do I want to be, what gets me out of bed in the morning, what does a meaningful and purposeful day look like, what does that feel like? And when I started exploring that and having conversations with the right people, it was just amazing how it was almost like the runway started lighting up, metaphorically speaking. And it's all these things I wish I'd known 10, 20 years ago, but the second best time to learn those things is now. So I'm pretty excited, and now I'm on a mission to go, how can I help? How can I use this knowledge, these experiences, to help others who might be stuck as well?
Yeah. And I know you're also studying psychology, so
Yeah,
that's
yes.
amazing. I think that if I could redo university, I would probably do a psychology degree. Yeah, I just think that's definitely on the cards for me sometime in the future as well. I think it's so profound and so beautiful that you're doing that. Did you want to say a little bit more about that? What sort of psychology route are you following?
So I'm doing a degree in psychology. I've been thinking about it for a long time
Yeah.
because I bring a lot of psychology to the work that I do because I love working with evidence-based ideas and concepts. And it was just been sitting on the back burner, and I just decided this feels like the right time to start it now. So add to my business credentials, the psychology credentials I think would be helpful. But funnily enough, the first paper in the degree is actually around business communication, and that's what I teach at the moment anyway. Because and one of the things that stuck out for me around communication was communication is really how we make meaning, how we create shared meaning with others. And that concept has just it just makes so much sense to me. I think we take communication for granted. As you can tell already,
Yes.
I'm pretty excited and quite passionate about going, what else can I learn that I can share with the world? So I want to be able to use this for myself so I can show up as the best version of myself, because I believe we've got to walk the talk for ourselves, and then also go, how can I transform lives, but also transform workplaces, because we spend so much time in the workplace, so that
Yes.
everyone benefits. So maybe I want to make the world a bit of a better place.
Yes, you do. You absolutely do. And thank you for that. We honor and appreciate you for doing that. I think, it's amazing how few people are courageous to step out and do what you do. So I want to just take a moment to really celebrate you. Amazing. You said something when we're talking about the psychology, yeah, the conversations and the communication. I think for me, it's very much, I was thinking about what came through for me was this idea of the hero's journey, and how we all have stories, and how we all essentially on heroes' journeys at different stages, and we're going full circle many times in our lives, depending on the steps that we take. And I love that you've presenced with us the fact that it's actually sometimes just a baby step. It's just taking that one small step with what you know and what you have right here, right now. You don't need to know the entire answer, the entire journey. You just need to know the next best step to take. So I love that you've presenced that with us. And then also how we actually learn from one another, how we communicate with one another is through storytelling. So that's really beautiful. Okay, so let's talk about communication when we are stressed, when we are under pressure. What happens? Tell us, help us understand what happens when we're stressed, under pressure. How does that impact our communication?
Oh, great question. And this is something that I've obviously lived firsthand. I had feedback probably more from my kids that when I'm under pressure, how my communication changes. So this is why I've got curious about this. First of all, we can be far more emotionally reactive when we're under significant pressure. We can respond from a place of emotion rather than thinking clearly. For anyone who's interested in the biology behind this, it's really because when we're under stress and the amygdala, the oldest part of your brain, responds as if you're being chased by a tiger, which would have been a real threat for hundreds of thousands of years. And when your amygdala is activated, your prefrontal cortex, the thinking, rational part of your brain, goes offline, for want of a better word. And so we're not thinking clearly, we're just reactive. So we can, under pressure, we can react from a place of emotion rather than responding from a place of intention. We can have difficulty expressing our needs. We can struggle to express what we want, what we need, and that can be for a number of reasons. There could be fear behind it. There could be anger. There could be all sorts of emotions driving that. I often hear about people shifting their communication style to be either passive, so they avoid difficult conversations, avoid again expressing their wants or needs, or they could become aggressive. So again, there's a bit of that fight and flight response coming through there. We can reduce our ability to communicate clearly because we might not be listening as carefully as we normally would. We might misread body cues. And we might speak faster, we might speak slower. So it can change how we, I guess, send our communication, receive communication. It can cause silence for some people. It can also cause a thing called presenteeism, where we are present in body but not in mind. Our mind's somewhere else, which I find fascinating. So there's a whole other raft of, I guess, communication and behaviours that might shift when we're under pressure, and often we're not aware of it because we're not thinking clearly, we're not showing up as the best version of ourselves necessarily. Okay. And of course, the why behind that then is you think about what impact does that have on our ability to do our best work, our ability to form healthy relationships with others. How does that affect the people around us when we're under pressure too, and how we show up? So this is why, I guess, understanding our own response to stress or pressure and how it affects our own communication, because we're all hardwired slightly differently. Having the awareness is really the first step so we can do something about it.
Absolutely. And so, so I think if we just sort of unpack that, in terms of the how to actually, start self-regulating and start catching it is really the first step, as you say, it's the awareness. So it's also the first step of the raw process is recognize. So it's really catching it and then containing it. So it's about, holding it and welcoming the emotion that's coming up.
Yes.
That's something that I've relatively recently started leaning into, because I think a lot of my life, and as you said earlier, you wish you'd learned these things 20 years ago, right? But a lot of my life, I've been always fighting it, like fighting the emotion. So it's like, you're almost like, I've actually had feedback in the past whilst I was still in my corporate career around this sort of lack of confidence in terms of, you're not able to express yourself. So in my case, it was a case of moving from South Africa to London And English being my second language, and I've not spoken English very well at the time. So I was translating everything from Afrikaans to English. And so the way that came across to the people I was communicating with was that I got flustered because I got angry and frustrated with myself every time I couldn't find the words quickly enough, or I couldn't express myself as well as I can in my mother tongue. So that was a very interesting dynamic, and it sort of happened for quite a long time. And it's not necessarily the feedback that's unhelpful, but it's actually the how you interpret it and what you do with it afterwards that creates the problems. So I think the sort of the awareness, the recognizing, but then also the welcoming of whatever is coming up for you and not necessarily fighting it so much.
Wow, that makes so much sense. And if I can add to that, Marilee, so one of my favorite areas around communication is understanding how our emotions drive our behavior. So I'm glad you explored that. There's a few things that come to mind in there. One is that if we lean into those emotions, we can actually make sense of the world around us. And so many of us
Yeah.
feel like, oh, there's these uncomfortable emotions going on. That's what I'm hearing from your story in there. Like, oh, there's these uncomfortable emotions going on. And so many of us then try and ignore, suppress, or numb them. So we think if we ignore them, they'll go away. Or we suppress them going, I shouldn't feel like this. I hate that expression because who should tell you what you should or shouldn't feel like? And suppressing them isn't healthy, and numbing them, you think about the numbing behaviors people engage in to try and, I guess, squash those uncomfortable feelings. But the research shows that actually the opposite is true. When we lean into our emotions and make sense of them, they lose their power and control over us, and we're in a better position to do something with it. And I like how you said make meaning. So if we think of our emotions as energy and motion, and they're trying to tell us something. So one of my favorite things here, look, I've actually got it right behind me because I use it myself. If we use an emotion wheel, reason being that if you say, how am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling happy or sad or angry as primary emotions. If we can get granular and use more specific words, like the language that we use is powerful, then we can make sense of it. So it could be like in a situation where, I'm feeling shame is very different to I'm feeling resentful versus I'm feeling frustrated versus I'm feeling powerless. And if we can try and get granular on the words and then go, why am I feeling this way? We need to give ourselves the space to go, why? Funnily enough, I always hold it out here and go, what's this trying to tell me? And really, if we connect that with our values, or we align that with our values and what's important to us, then we've got a better position to go, okay, and my brain's trying to keep me safe. That's my amygdala, right? Thinks I'm being chased by a tiger, but actually I might be worried about what other people think of me right now. I think about public speaking and the fear that people have, with the anxiety. If you connect that uncomfortable emotion with your values, it's like, actually, that's that fear of failure. I don't want people to see that I'm not perfect. And then when we lean into that, we're more likely to go, okay, now what can I do? So the framework that I use is name, tame, reframe. If we can get really granular and name what we're feeling and why, make sense of why, tame it, go, what can I do? Can I just breathe out? How do I release that energy? Can I go for a walk, get a glass of water, talk to a friend just to release some of that energy? And then how can I reframe this? Now that I know where there might be a disconnect with my values, how can I show up? And just another thought in there that I hear a lot, how the inner critic shows up for so many of us. Often these uncomfortable feelings are because we've got this inner critic. I use the analogy here of having an inner critic on my shoulder. Is you're not good enough, you're going to fail, people will see that you're not perfect. And it's trying to keep me safe. And what I really want to do is listen to the inner coach who goes, actually, you're doing the best you can. What have you learned from this? What can you try? What's the smallest step you can take? And you wouldn't talk to your friends that way. So why are you talking to your friends in such a harsh manner? So I love these different frameworks and ideas that help us make sense of what we're feeling and why, because that then puts us back in the space of control. the biology there is if we can somehow tell our amygdala, look, I'm safe, my life's not in danger, so we can get this part of our brain online, then we're more likely to think through the best solution, again, so we can show up as the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So can you just name those three things again, in terms of allowing the emotion to come in?
Yeah. So name it, tame
You
it,
name it,
tame
tame,
it, reframe it.
name it, tame it, reframe it. I
Yes.
absolutely love that. The words that I've been using recently, and it's just been catch, contain,
Mm-hmm.
reframe. But I love that you talk about taming it, because I think it's
Mm.
really about how do you journey in relationship with that
Yeah.
fear. Let's just say
Yes.
it's a fear that you have, and what's the as you say, what's the empowered voice? What is the inner roar conversation? And I think what I sort of really love is the fact that actually, you know what? If you want to, if you are dreaming big, if you've got bold dreams, you've got to take brave action. You've got to be courageous.
Mm.
And so, yes, the fears are going to come up. It's going to journey with you. And you must allow the fear to journey with you, but not being in the driving seats.
Mm.
And so I think that's really super, super important.
If I can add to that, I'm a
Yeah.
massive fan of Dr. Susan David.
Okay.
Are you
Yes.
familiar with
Too.
Dr. Susan David's
Yes.
work?
Love
Yes.
her.
Um, one of my favorite expressions from her, one of my favorite quotes, is that the uncomfortable emotions are the cost of living a meaningful life. And I even say to people quite jokingly, look, if you want to have an easy life, just stay in bed all day and pull the sheets over your head and hide away from the world. But does anyone want to do that? No. So if you want to have a rich and meaningful life, that's driven by purpose and meaning, the price you pay is there are going to be some really uncomfortable emotions. But guess what? You get also the other side of the emotion wheel with all these glorious emotions that light you up and make life amazing. So that's a concept that works for me. We can't
Yeah.
just have it all easy. In fact, none of us want an easy life. I talk about people, what does your best day at work look like? Is it an easy one? And people go, no, it's not an easy day. It's the ones where you have meaningful challenges, where you come away going, oh yeah, I feel like I've grown, I've learned something. Like that's pretty rich and meaningful.
Yeah, no, it's so true, and I love that you know analogy. I think it's so beautiful, and it also reminds me very much of the work of Dr. Brené Brown, and
Yeah.
the courage and vulnerability coexisting. There's your courage does not exist without vulnerability. So we've got to lean into those difficult emotions. We've got to talk about the things that get in the way. And so I think in a workplace context, and I think there's often very, very big tension and conflicts, amongst differences in opinion, competitive behavior, I
Mm-hmm.
dare I say egos that get in the way
Yes.
of, good communication and good decision making. And so, what do you see in that space, without obviously revealing confidential client information, but, I would imagine that a lot of the times you've got to deal with where you've got tricky situations where there's lack of trust in teams, lack
Mm-hmm.
of sort of psychological safety. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Really, a lot of it comes down to self-awareness first and foremost. So if we go, what am I feeling and why? And then we're in a better position to take responsibility for how we show up rather than reacting from a place of anger and fear. We want to respond with intention, which is
Yeah.
quite different, right? So in between the stimulus and the response, there's that gap where we can choose how we respond so we don't say or do things that we later regret. So I start with that awareness piece, which is what you said earlier on in this podcast. We start with self-awareness,
Yes.
and then we're in a position to think, okay, how am I feeling and how is that aligned with my values or disconnected from my values? Then the next step is also going, okay, so how can I communicate this? So it could be communicating with ourselves, but also communicating with others in the workplace, because we're social creatures, and the relationships that we have with others are absolutely crucial. Absolutely
Yes.
crucial. Often people won't forget what people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So we've got to be very mindful about that energy that we bring. So this is where I then look into like communication tools or approaches about, particularly if we need to have a really difficult conversation. So many of us were never taught how to have a difficult but necessary conversation with others. So, funnily enough, that's a huge part of the focus that I'm on at the moment. So many people asking me for help. How do I approach this when I need to express what my wants and needs are? Because if I don't express those, I'm going to end up resentful. People are going to cross over into my boundaries. So I talk a lot about how to get clear on your boundaries, how to communicate your boundaries with respect to others. It's always with respect. And I'd say a really big piece of advice here, no matter how we communicate, is always thinking about we want to align our needs and values and wants with other people's needs, values, and wants. And if there's a disconnect, we still need to be careful about how we approach that with respect. It's always about respect for others, but also respect for our own wants, needs, and values.
Yeah, I use the OK corral for that. So I'm okay, you're okay,
Yeah.
in the sense of you have to have positive regard for yourself,
Mm.
and you must have positive regard for the other person. So going into a conversation curious, not
Yeah.
furious, and
Yes.
wanting to learn, wanting to learn about each other, wanting to
Yep.
actually really understand each other's perspectives. So really going
Mm.
in with a much more approachable mindset, I think is
Mm-hmm.
so important.
It is, and like I said earlier on, this is again, if we look at communication, is not about saying I want or need this. Communication is shared understanding, and shared
Yeah.
understanding doesn't necessarily mean we need to agree. In fact, many
Yes.
times we don't agree. That's okay, but it's
Yeah.
the shared understanding that makes all the difference in our relationships.
Yeah. There is a book that I use a lot in this space, and I suspect you probably as well, but it's called Difficult Conversations.
Yeah,
How to discuss what matters most.
I was just checking. I've got a huge library behind me. It's probably on my shelf.
Yeah, it probably is, but it talks to some of the themes that you're exploring.
Mm.
But that is really so for people that would love to go deeper on this and would love to read up more about. There are three types of difficult conversations, so you can always categorize a difficult conversation into three buckets. So it's kind of the what happened conversation. So there's a dispute about what happened. There's the feelings conversation. So there's
Mhm.
obviously our feelings have been hurt. And there's also then the identity conversation. And I mean, you so beautifully talked about identity earlier, and how that can play into communication. And if we struggle with that. So yeah, so any conversation, any difficult conversation, you can always put into one of those three categories. And then what the book then so beautifully helps you do is actually, once you've labeled it, once you've identified which type of conversation it is, you can then enter into that learning conversation to then approach it in the most productive way to create that sort of win-win outcome for everybody. And as you say, you don't necessarily have to agree. So yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Um, any other books that you can recommend? I'm just thinking whilst we're on books. Yeah, it's really such
Like
a
I've got loads of books that I recommend, loads of books. But I
yeah.
do have some practical tips around how to improve communication under pressure, because we've talked a bit about, I guess, understanding how our brain responds to stress as well, and how it might affect communication. So I do have a few top tips off the top of my head, particularly in a workplace environment. Number one is about making sure that there's psychological safety. Gosh, that's absolutely huge. But where people actually feel safe to speak up, share their concerns, ask questions and admit their mistakes without any fear. And I've worked with some amazing organizations lately that live and breathe that, and it's great. People can speak up, go, gosh, I've made a mistake, or I've got an uncomfortable question here, and that's beautiful because that improves communication. Everyone can get on and do what they need to do. So I love that. Learn how to communicate assertively. Again, so many of us were never taught how to communicate and express our needs clearly while respecting other people's needs as well. And I'd say if you're a business leader too, or any kind of leader, I think even as a parent, how do we role model healthy communication behaviors? Like, be a role model instead of expecting it from other people. And I hear that a lot. We're quick to blame other people for what they're not good at. But then I think, how do we hold a mirror up to ourselves? This comes back to what you said about self-awareness again. How do we hold the mirror up to ourselves and go, oh, where are the opportunities for me to improve? How can I learn and grow and just keep honing my own skills? So that we can be, again, show up as the best version of ourselves. I'm fortunate that I've had my own children have given me some very honest feedback, which is uncomfortable to hear at times. But if we don't get that feedback or even seek it out, how do we know how we're showing up and what impact does that have on relationships? So I think being a lifelong learner and being curious, not furious, I love that. The more curious we are, the better chance we have of learning. Also, being curious actually helps to control that amygdala response, that emotional response. So when we get curious, we're more likely to fire up the thinking part of our brain. So it's something that I think we can all benefit from.
Love that. Thank you. Those are beautiful tips, and I think the psychological safety one is really the organization's responsibility. In terms of creating that culture of safety and psychological safety in particular. And I often call this out because I think too many times, when people are struggling, the organization have not actually created the culture for people to actually thrive, to actually being able to speak up. People are afraid of retribution. They're afraid, of comebacks and blame. And you and I, who work also in the cybersecurity space, we know this is particularly prevalent, when people are dealing with, the stress from being victims to cybercrime, and it's really that sort of emotional turmoil that people feel. And so if there isn't psychological safety, people will not speak up, they will not raise their hands, they will not be open, they will not be honest. And I think calling that out, I think, is super important.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Anyways, so I can't believe that we've been going. I feel like we've only scratched the surface because there are so many threads here, so many things that I want to explore more. Maybe we can have a part 2 to this conversation and go a little
Love
bit
it.
deeper. I
Yes.
so love that. This is the stuff I think that matters the most. Like, I really, really do believe that communication, like you, communication is really, what unleashes everything, and it's core to your own well-being, your own health and well-being, but also the health and the wellness of your relationships and the personal relationships that you're able to establish with people. If you are well and healthy, you can really build strong, deep personal relationships with other people. So thank you, Carley.
Oh,
Any
thank you,
final
Carley.
thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh,
You've
there's
given your
so so many in there. This has just been, this is the stuff I live and breathe, and obviously you do too, Marilise. And I think it's always wonderful when like-minded people come together. I think there's power in that. But all of our conversations, I always learn something from you. And I think, if final word there, I think if we can all be open to learning and
yeah.
being better versions of ourselves, even if it's just the teeny tiny bits. How can I just be 1% better than yesterday? Or actually, my favorite quote at the moment, because I've got so many of them, what would my future self thank me for? What would my future self thank me for? Can help us maybe with making the right kind of decisions today, values aligned decisions that help us get where we want to be tomorrow.
And you've just beautifully illustrated the power of asking better questions. And so, really the quality of our lives, depend on the quality of the questions that we ask. So, how would my future self thank me? I want everybody to hear this, and I want everybody to take this away and start asking yourself, how would my future self thank me? I absolutely love that. I'm going to start asking myself that now every day. I love, love, love that. So awesome. Thank you so much. I want people to be able to reach you, of course, if they want to have a longer conversation. So I know your website is Carley Nicholson, and if easier, you can just Google Peace Under Pressure, and you will find Carley. And she's also on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn
Yes.
is your main platform. So please reach out and have a conversation, especially if you have some deep challenges in your organization around team working, team collaboration, team communication. Carly is definitely the person that you want to work with. So thank you so much again. Thank you for sharing your heart. And like you, I always learn something new, which is beautiful. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. If you loved the conversation, please hit the subscribe button. We really are now finishing up 2024 with strong, I should say. Can't believe we're near Christmas already. So I don't want you to miss a minute. So please subscribe to the Roar podcast, and we will be back in 2025 with some more amazing people. In the meantime, have a wonderful Christmas, everybody. Take care.